Good afternoon. You know, my daughters will be impressed that I followed Elle Macpherson to the stage, So this is a once-in-a-lifetime story. Delighted to be here, to be part of the extended Babson family. I've been with Babson about 5 years now. And I've also been on a journey in the area of what we call conscious capitalism for the last 12 years or so. And we started a movement in the US called Conscious Capitalism in February 2008 with the CEO of Whole Foods. And then a bunch of other people joined over time, trying to change the story of business. That the old narrative does not inspire, does not motivate in the way that it needs to, and it doesn't really tap into the full power and beauty of capitalism and what capitalism can in fact do. I think Roger Babson's words were actually quite beautiful, saying business really exists as a vehicle of service to humanity. And I think we need to reconnect with that idea. And that idea actually has no limit. There is no limit to our consciousness, and there is no limit to how much positive impact business can have in the world. And in fact, if not business, who's going to do it? No other institution in society is able to do that. Just very briefly, for those of you who don't know about conscious capitalism, this has 4 basic ideas. It asks the question, why do we exist? There should be a higher purpose. What do? We create value not only for shareholders, but for employees, for their families, for customers, for communities, for the environment, for the future. Who are we as leaders, the people who care about the purpose of the organization and care about the people whose lives we touch? And how do we operate? We create workplaces that are filled with trust and transparency and actually caring for human beings rather than be driven by fear and stress. So those are the fundamental pillars. As I said, we've been around about 10 years as a movement. We're in 15 countries and 35 US cities now. And for me, it's an ongoing journey to explore the higher reaches of what this can mean. And with that, I've come to the belief, and I was using the acronym HEALING, for purpose. I believe every great purpose needs to be a healing purpose. That in some way we need to alleviate suffering and increase joy in the world through our business, whatever that chosen path might be. But I've come to think about that even more deeply as, in fact, something that can characterize an organization, that business, in fact, can be a source and force for healing in the world. And we do need that. We have made a lot of progress in the last couple of 100 years due to capitalism. Per capita incomes have gone up 1,500%. Life expectancy has more than doubled. Literacy has gone from 13% to 87%. Violence has declined. Wars have declined. All kinds of good things have happened in the world. And yet, it is completely accurate to say that we still live in a world of extraordinary amounts of pain and suffering. And all you have to do is open your eyes and your hearts, and you will see that tens of thousands of children died today of preventable causes, that 45 million Americans over the age of 18 suffer from debilitating anxiety, that the rates of suicide have gone up 25% in the last 12 years, that the rates of drug addiction and opioid, the epidemic has killed 500,000 people and continues to do so. There is a tremendous amount of suffering out there. Physical violence has declined. As Steven Pinker documented so comprehensively in his book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, we are actually living in the most peaceful time in human history. It doesn't seem like that. As Bill Clinton said, don't mistake the headlines for the trend lines. But the fact is that there's a lot of hidden suffering still, and I would call that psychic suffering. Tremendous amount of psychic suffering that exists in the world, and therefore the need for healing. And we need healing at every level. We need to heal ourselves as individuals. We need to heal our families and our communities. You can see the need for that all around. Our companies and our countries need healing. There are so many countries right now that are going through tremendous divisions and tortured histories that we haven't moved past. Certainly our planet needs our care and attention and all the life that's on it. And we need to heal the past before we can fully heal in the present and in the future. We need to come to terms, as South Africa did, with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that allowed them then to move forward without that country being engulfed in revenge-fueled violence for decades. So we need to practice all of these forms of healing. And in that sense, I believe healing needs to be the meta purpose of our age for all of us as individuals and as organizations of any kind, whether it's business or other kinds. Ultimately, that is, I believe, the highest calling for human beings, to be some form or some instrument for healing of some kind. And if you don't consciously choose to be part of the healing, we are probably inadvertently part of the hurting. Now, very few human beings set out to hurt others, and yet it happens, we do so. Right? Because we're not aware, we're not conscious, we're not mindful. We don't understand the consequences of our actions. We don't recognize the power of our wake because we're so focused on where we're going. As the Dalai Lama said, our prime purpose in this life is to help others. And if you can't help them, at least don't hurt them. And I'm afraid too many of us and our businesses are actually hurting people. They're hurting the families, they're hurting the children of those families, and they are hurting the future. So too many businesses are a source of hurting. What happens? Young people come into businesses relatively whole and healthy, and what happens over time to people as they work longer and longer? You know, we talk about burnout, right? We talk about stress. Chronic stress is connected with work. Heart attacks are higher on Monday morning. People burn out, people get stressed out, and as a result of chronic stress leads to chronic disease, which accounts for 75% of our healthcare spending. Our healthcare crisis is a crisis of caring, and it's a crisis of how we work. It all begins there. That's where we spend most of our waking hours. That is the source of most of the stress, and that stress is the cause of most chronic disease. We can solve our healthcare crisis by changing the way we work. As I said, heart attacks are 20% higher on Monday morning. 4 a.m. on Monday morning is the peak of heart attacks. Think about that. Our work is literally killing us. Murderers and terrorists and wars and all those things are not. But our work is now the biggest single killer. My friend Jeffrey Pfeffer at Stanford has a new book called Dying for a Paycheck. And he documents how much the way in which we work and motivate and do all of that is causing extraordinary suffering, including premature deaths. 88% of Americans feel they work for a company that doesn't actually see them as a human being or care for them as a human being. They are just a function, an object, easily replaceable. Right? Imagine what kind of emotional impact that has. And then what happens when you go home, when you leave work feeling this way? Emotions are intensely contagious, far more than any virus, positive and negative emotions, and that gets carried into the family. You know, P. Sainath wrote an op-ed in the New York Times just last week. He said how agonized we are about how people die, and yet how untroubled we are about how they live. And how are people living? You know, I heard in the last panel people talking about, or the one before the last, how we are living in an extraordinarily vibrant time economically. The economy is at its heights, right? We have full employment, we have the record stock market prices. Right? It looks great, but what's happening under the surface? What is happening in that economy in the richest country in the history of the world today? What is the reality? About 60% of Americans work hourly, right? So they don't have a regular full-time job in the sense they get paid by the hour, and most of them, of course, don't have benefits and they don't have retirement, all of that. And the same number, 60%, so that's about 85 million people. 60% of American households are today technically insolvent. Their liabilities exceed their assets. They are bankrupt, essentially, without having declared bankruptcy. And they're going further into debt every year. And this kind of financial stress has extraordinary consequences on people. Just to give further color on that, 50% of Americans have less than $400 in the bank. And if they needed $2,000 for an emergency of some kind, within 30 days, they would not be able to raise that money from friends, from family, and not from their employer. And that takes a crisis and a problem and makes it into a whole disaster. You know, you could lose your car, lose your house for a small amount of money. And that's how close to the edge the majority of people are in the richest country in the world at a time of peak prosperity. Why has this happened? Well, you look in the last 35 years, where have the profits gone? Where have the fruits and the benefits of capitalism gone? you can see that worker pay has barely risen, whereas executive pay has skyrocketed. This is not the way this system is supposed to work. This is a system of extraordinary value creation that should then be spread. It's a system where everybody can win and everybody should be winning, but a lot of people are not winning. And this kind of stuff leads to revolutions, okay? This kind of stuff leads to upheavals in societies when this goes on for too long, and it has been going on, and we're seeing the results of some of that ferment, I think, come to the surface. Financial stress clearly then leads to physical distress, from migraines to depressions to anxiety to muscle tension, stomach ulcers, high blood pressure, insomnia. All of these are a consequence of financial stress. When you are that close to ruin, imagine the state of your daily existence. Imagine how patient and loving you can be with your children, in your marriage, or any situation. How attentive can you be to customers, right? And again, these are people working full time. And there are so many stories. A friend of mine has started a company in San Francisco called Paycheck, where he's trying to address one of these gaps. You know, he says people don't get paid until the end of 2 weeks, hourly people, right? But meanwhile, bills come due. Rents and all come due early in the month. So maybe they have enough to get by, but the money doesn't come in at the right time. So they end up going to payday lenders, for example, at exorbitant fees, and then if they can't pay back, exorbitant interest rates, which just compound and multiply, and before you know it, it's a disaster. So they've stepped in a very simple way to say, you know what, you're actually lending money to the company for those 2 weeks because you've already done the work. Company's holding on to the money. So they come in and they've agreed with Walmart, and now I've got them with Whole Foods and many others, to say for a $5 fee, you have access to your next paycheck. You don't need to go to a payday lender. Right? It's a win-win. Companies, it doesn't cost them anything. It's saving a tremendous amount of stress on people. For small amounts of money, for $10, $15, $20, people get into enormous messes. They get evicted from homes, and then they can never find another apartment. I mean, there's just extraordinary suffering out there. The fact is, we put a price tag on everything except suffering. If you were to just try to estimate the amount of suffering that has gone into anything that we buy or consume or experience, like what was the human being behind that experiencing, and what did they have to go through for us to have what we have, we'll find that we actually don't put a price tag on it. We don't put a value on it. And if we did, it would be enormous, because there is a lot of suffering. The human cost of doing business is not accounted for. We have very sophisticated cost accounting methods for down to the fraction of a penny, but we don't capture the human cost on the people, on their health, on their children, on their family. And I think those are the largest costs associated with anything that we consume. The sad irony of this is that even the healing professions, you know, we talk about higher purpose. Well, what's more higher purpose than being a doctor or a nurse or a veterinarian? You're saving lives. Even those professions have become places of suffering. They have higher rates of drug dependency, depression, and suicides are double the rate for doctors than they are for ordinary people. So again, they're doing something that they are passionate about, and yet the way we organize work isn't working. The work is meaningful, but the way we run the hospitals and the businesses is taking that work and draining it of joy and adding all kinds of suffering into it. So we need to change the way we work. This is from a show called Billions. I don't know if you've seen this. It's a pretty amazing show, actually. Chuck Rhodes is the US attorney in that show. He says to his wife, I wish I could be more human, but I haven't figured out how to do that and do my job at the same time. Our jobs require us to check our humanity at the door. Business is a form of war. You go in to do battle, you put on your mask and you put on your armor. That's the legacy or the history of business. It all comes from the military. All the language, all the ways of organizing and leading, strategy, tactic, it all comes from the military. Business is not war, but it has become a kind of war. So business is a major cause of suffering. We have to acknowledge that as business leaders in this room. You have to say, maybe that is possible, maybe that is true. You didn't set out to do that. You did not intend to. But business is a major cause of suffering, and therefore, it needs to be the primary cure. I don't see anybody else is going to cure this. We have lots of nonprofits that are set up specifically to deal with the consequences of all of the stuff people suffer at work. Well, we should be obsoleting those nonprofits because we should not create those conditions to begin with at work. We are the cause, but we are the cure as well. We have to be, because that's where people are. So done right, business can be actually a place that we alleviate suffering and we elevate joy. And I'll share some stories with you. And this is not about creating a healing business. It's not about saying we should all have spas and do those things, right? This is about business itself as a healing activity. Think about that. You are meeting people's needs. You are serving people. You're enabling a livelihood. You're enabling somebody to pursue a passion and through that to serve other human beings. What could be more meaningful if it is done with that right energy? So business can inherently be a healing activity if it is done the right way. So how is that possible? How can business be a source and a force for healing? Well, first of all, as I said, we have to accept and confront that idea. As James Baldwin said, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. So first thing we have to do is face up to this reality and say, is it indeed true that in our organization there is suffering? Suffering exists. Now, some of it is brought in from home, but some of it is added to at work. It does exist. All of it impacts how people are able to function. Certainly impacts their productivity and their efficiency and their efficacy at work. So we have to acknowledge the reality that this thing does exist. Let me tell you a couple of stories. We talked to a CEO of a call center company, and he said, in my company, I didn't realize we have a caste system. Like in India, there's a caste system. In our company, there's a caste. We got the salaried people, college educated, MBAs, high engagement, low turnover, lots of opportunities for advancement, leadership development programs. They're doing great. And then we have the 80% of our employees who get paid hourly, who actually answer the phones. They're actually doing the work that our company is about. And he said their life is very different. Turnover is 118%. Engagement is 12%. And he says, imagine that if our CFO is driving to work in the morning, and there's a pothole on the way, and her Mercedes hits the pothole, and her tire blows out and there's some damage to the rim and so forth. So she pulls over, she calls AAA, car gets towed to the Mercedes dealer, and then she calls for an Uber, whatever, gets a ride, gets to the office about an hour late, and everybody's very solicitous. Oh my God, you went through this. That must have been awful. Are you okay? And that afternoon, the car gets delivered, washed and polished, and with the new tire, it's all set, right? It's a non-event. Now imagine that one of the other workers in that same company is driving on that same road, and her car blows up. The tire blows up, right? She does not have insurance. She does not have AAA. She's looking at, $700, $800, which she has no idea where that's going to come from. She can't just call for it. She calls a few friends, trying getting a ride. She can't afford to pay $40 or whatever. Finally gets to work 3 hours late. He's called in to the supervisor. He's reprimanded. She's given a black mark. 3 of these and you're out. She's docked for her pay for those 3 hours. And then she's told, now go and be nice to our customers. The person who needed our empathy and our support gets none of it. Her life is now in a moment of crisis. She doesn't know what's going to happen. And yet in our companies, we are completely indifferent to that suffering. So the CEO became very conscious. He said, I have to change this. I have to get that. It's ridiculous that our turnover rate is 118%. The industry average is 150%. What can we do? How can we improve conditions? How can we get people, lives, improve their lives? They got their turnover down to about 20, 25%. They did a bunch of things. And then they started a program called Dream On. It's kind of like the Make-A-Wish Foundation thing. They said people do have these emergencies, and they need money, and we want to be able to help. We don't want you to for that thing to become a terrible disaster for you. So if you have a thing that we can help with, please apply here on this website, and we're going to help. And for 2 weeks, nobody applied, because people are proud. People are stoic and heroic. People carry around these burdens, and they want to be professional. They want to do their job, and they do. It's amazing what people do. And after 2 weeks, finally they get a response. And it comes from one of their employees who's a mother. And she says, I'm really sorry, but I didn't know where else to turn. My ex-husband stopped paying child support 2 weeks ago, and I got evicted from the apartment a week ago. And I've been living in a car with my 2 kids for a week now. And I just can't do this to them anymore. I'm so sorry. She was so apologetic that she needed help, And the CEO, John Ratliff, reads this. And he says, the only thing I felt is a deep sense of shame. What kind of business am I running? One of my full-time employees is homeless, and she can't even tell us. How is this okay? Of course, they got her into a hotel that night, and within a week, they helped her find a new apartment, helped her with the first month, last month, and all of those are massive hurdles for most people to get over, right? And they said to her, you don't have to tell other people. If you want, we can keep this confidential. She said, are you kidding? This is the nicest thing anybody has ever done for me. I'm going to tell everybody I know. And they did, and before you know it, the floodgates opened, and so many stories came pouring out. So many other people were homeless. Other people were dealing with all kinds of things, from kids with special needs to elderly parents to evictions. There's a book called Evicted that won the Pulitzer Prize last year. The level of evictions in the US, city of Richmond, 16% of people get evicted every year. And building your life back after that, all your furniture's on the street corner. We can't even imagine that, okay? So there's an awful lot of this. So there are a number of stories. So we're in the process of writing this book now, and we're interviewing lots and lots of CEOs. There's a company called JBN Consulting in Atlanta, started by ex-McKinsey consultants. And they said, when we were going through the ranks and rising in McKinsey, we basically were away Monday to Thursday every single week. And we really didn't see our kids. And now the kids are grown up and it's too late. And that seems a pretty high price to pay to be a consultant. So they started a consulting company where the norm is all clients are local. You don't need to travel for work because children are our stakeholders in this business. Consciously, they've identified children as stakeholders. That's too high a price to pay. And nobody's asking for that because you say that's what it means to be a consultant. You have to pay that price. No. You can challenge those assumptions. You can change and create a different way of being in every industry. The CEO of Aetna, Mark Bertolini, went through a terrible accident, broke his neck and before he became CEO. And then later on, because of mindfulness and meditation and all kinds of healing practices, he was able to recover full functioning. And he said, all of this benefited me so much. I want to make it available to all my employees. And they did. And they saw a huge impact. Healthcare costs went down, well-being went up, all kinds of things went up. They actually raised the pay to $16 an hour from $12 an hour. Their healthcare budget costs had gone down. They were able to do all these things. As he said, if we can create a healthier you, we can create a healthier world and healthier company. There are things America is amazingly outstanding at, and then there are things that I would say are the shame of America. One of that is the prison system. 5% of the world's population, 25% of the world's prisoners are in the US. That's a massive number of people. And what happens? In the US, there are 70 million people today with some kind of a criminal record, the same number that have a college degree, because of this overzealous legal system that we have, judicial system, right? 70 million with some kind of criminal record, 70 million that have a college degree. Same number. Think about that. Now, there's a box you have to tick in a job application form. Have you ever been, right? Those 70 million people are then locked out of most jobs because most companies don't want to hire people like that. So how are they going to get back? They've paid their dues. It was a non-violent offense. They went to jail. They did the fine. And now I don't have a chance. So Greyston Bakery was started by a rabbi in Yonkers. And he said, I want to give people a first chance. He said, there are people in our country that don't even get a first chance. Forget about a second chance. They grow up in terrible neighborhoods with lousy schools, and they have no opportunity to get out of that. They're surrounded by drugs and violence. They get caught up in the system, and then before you know it, you can't get out of that system. This young man, Dion Drew, came to our conference along with the CEO, and he said, I've been in jail 3 times. Last time for 3 years, and then I was out for months looking for a job, and nobody would talk to me. And finally, I found Greyston Bakery, and I got a job there. Now I have an apartment, and I have a 3-year-old girl. And he had tears in his eyes. He said, if it weren't for this company, I would be dead or I would be back in jail. That's the power and impact that a business can have. As the founder says, we don't hire people to bake brownies. We bake brownies to hire people. Business is a means to an end of human flourishing. And every business can be thought about that way. Business can heal communities. After the recent hurricane in Houston, what's it called, Harvey? Hurricane Harvey, I think. So there's a grocery chain in Texas called H-E-B. And this company is legendary. They have their own emergency response system where they have people 365 days a year, 24 hours a day working on the next disaster. And they get there before FEMA and Red Cross when something happens. They are in the community within hours. And this has been their record for a long time. And they do all kinds of things, from feeding first responders to making sure their stores open literally within a day or two and stocked with the right things, and they have helicopters that they use to drop stuff, all kinds of stuff. They are completely embedded in that community. And this company was started by the grandmother of the current chairman, Charles Butt. It has her caring energy in that company. And I talked to the CEO, he said, my directions from the chairman of this company, he said, please, pay our people as much as you can, not as little as you can. This is the company with the lowest prices of any grocery chain in Texas and the highest wages. It's kind of like Mercadona, the experience we had in Valencia yesterday. Those things are not contradictory. You pay people well, treat them well, all kinds of business benefits flow from that, right? So again, a company that's healing its people and healing its communities. We interviewed we saw this guy on TV actually and then interviewed him. He runs a software company in Kentucky, coal country, where people have lost jobs, and those jobs are not coming back, despite what some people think. And he was outsourcing a lot of software development to India, as a lot of these companies do, but he looked around him at all these people just hanging around with nothing to do, and he said, you know what, I'm going to train them to code. And he started a program to convert coal miners into coders. And then he gives them jobs, good paying jobs, right? And as he says, Kentucky Coal powered the nation for the last 100 years. Kentucky Code will do the same for the next 100. Again, healing a community using his business, making a difference. Certainly, healing the environment is a huge, huge responsibility of business, because what's causing damage is the way we produce things. Pollution kills 9 million people every year. And that's 15 times more than wars and terrorists and civil strife and all this combined. And business is the source. The way we produce is the source of most of that pollution. Doesn't have to be. If you have the desire and intention, you can actually eradicate most of that pollution. You just have to want to do it. Human creativity is unlimited once you give people an inspiring purpose and set them free. Our societies are divided tremendously. Business can be the healing agent. I was in Israel a couple of years ago and went to Haifa, and there are all these businesses, entrepreneurial ventures started by people that employ Arabs and Jews working next to each other. There are many parts of the world where businesses are the ones that are breaking past the religious, the ethnic, the tribal, all of that, right? To say we can all be part of this thing together. And business can also play a role in this left-right divide, which has never been deeper than it is right now in the US. Why? Because if you think about it, what gave rise to socialism, Marxism, militant unionism, communism? Those things never existed on this planet until we had industrial capitalism. And industrial capitalism operated in such a way where people were treated as objects and working conditions were horrendous and people were dying on the job. For example, at Carnegie Steel, 10% every year. No wonder it caused this backlash. Unconscious, low consciousness capitalism, purely focused on money, gave rise to all of these things. And therefore, in order to respond to that, we have to change the way we practice capitalism. None of those things. Unions are not necessary when workers are delighted and happy and engaged and productive. Nobody even thinks about any of those other things. So we have to play a larger role. Finally, whether we are a healing organization or hurting organization has almost everything to do with the leader. Leaders set the tone. What's inside the leader manifests outside. Philip Zimbardo ran the famous Stanford prison experiments, which were inspired by the experiments done at Yale earlier, right, where they tortured people with voltage just trying to get them to do things. Asking the question, how do we get ordinary people to do terrible things to other people? How does that happen? Certainly in the Holocaust, etc. And as he said, all evil starts with 15 volts. You create a climate where it's okay to make other people suffer because somebody else is taking responsibility. That's what happened in the Milgram experiments. And he said, is it about bad apples? There's just a few bad people and therefore it's not a big, or is it that we have bad barrels which are causing those apples to go bad? Or is it that we have bad barrel makers? That's the leader. That the person who designs the system and the culture is the one that's going to cause, human beings are capable of being on this side or this side. We have our higher angels, we have our demons. Leaders are the ones who bring out either the best in us or the worst in us. You operate from fear, everybody's going to be down there. Dog eat dog, that's kind of where we are in most businesses. So the macrocosm is a reflection of the microcosm. What's inside manifests outside. And my favorite philosopher says, fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering. If you have leaders who are rooted in fear and operating from that place, that's going to create extraordinary suffering. And as John Kenneth Galbraith said, all great leaders have one characteristic in common, the willingness to confront unequivocally the major anxiety of people in their time. And these anxieties, the financial insecurity and all these other things, these are the anxieties of people in our time, being treated as objects, not being valued, respected as human beings. Human dignity, as the Pope says, needs to be at the center of everything that we do. And if you think about it, if you know that there's a better way to do something that does not inflict suffering and actually elevates business performance, it is unconscionable for us to continue operating in the other way. We talk about medical malpractice. Well, this is leadership malpractice. Why would you do that when there's a better way that doesn't cause those irreplaceable costs on people and their families? It's finally time to give love a chance in the world of business. That's really what conscious capitalism is. Can you build businesses on love and care, not just on self-interest alone? And it's later than we think. There's a line in Hamilton, the play that's all the rage in the US right now. Alexander Hamilton wrote 26 of the 52 Federalist Papers in 6 months. And he was writing like a man possessed, right? And one of the songs in there says, why do you write like you're running out of time? You write day and night like you're running out of time. Every day you fight like you're running out of time. He said, I don't know, but I have a sense of urgency about all this. And I think we're at a time where we need to have a sense of urgency about all this because we see where the world is today. In some ways, we're going backwards. We thought we were on a right trajectory, right? There's a sense of urgency. So my last thought for you is take care of the people in every dimension, what that means. And they will take care of the business. It's all about the people. Human beings are a source. They're not a resource. Let's enable people to function in that way by changing the way we work, changing the way we lead, and changing the way we organize. Thank you so much. Thank you. Good to be with you.